aboard the opulent SS Karnak, gliding down the shimmering Nile, a web of love, greed, and betrayal unravels. When heiress Lynette Ridgway is found shot, her husband Simon and his ex-lover, Jacqueline stand accused. Hercule Poirot, the brilliant detective, untangles a deadly plot, staged alibis, stolen pearls, and a second murder to silence a witness. As the river hides its secrets, Poirot's little gray cells reveal a chilling truth: a lover's pact turned murderous, where passion and fortune collide in a game no one wins. Chapter 1. The SS Karnak sets sail. The SS Karnak cut through the Nile's glassy waters, its white hull gleaming under the relentless Egyptian sun. The air was thick with heat, and the faint scent of jasmine carried on a breeze that did little to cool the deck. Passengers lounged under striped awnings, their voices a soft murmur against the rhythmic churn of the steamer's engines. Among them sat Hercule Poirot, the diminutive Belgian detective, his impeccable black suit and polished shoes at odds with the languid atmosphere. His mustache, waxed to perfection, quivered slightly as he sipped a citron press, his sharp eyes scanning the scene with the precision of a watchmaker. Poirot had come to Egypt for repose, a rare pause from the ceaseless demands of his profession. Yet, as he observed his fellow travelers, he sensed the stirrings of a drama that would not permit rest. At the center of the deck, commanding attention like a queen, was Lynette Ridgway, an heiress whose beauty and wealth were the talk of London society. Her golden hair caught the sunlight, and her laughter rang out, bright but edged with a note of artifice. Beside her sat her husband, Simon Doyle, a tall man with broad shoulders and an easy smile that seemed to falter under scrutiny. His eyes, Poirot noted, lacked the confidence of a man secure in his fortune. Across the deck, half hidden by a potted palm, sat a young woman whose presence prickled the air with tension. Jacqueline de Belfort was slender, almost fragile, her dark eyes burning with an intensity that belied her delicate frame. She wore a simple white dress, but her fingers twisted a handkerchief with restless energy. Poirot's gaze lingered on her, noting the way her eyes followed Lynette and Simon. A mixture of longing and something darker, resentment, perhaps, or even hate. The detective's musings were interrupted by the approach of Mrs. Allerton, a cheerful American widow with a penchant for gossip. "Monsieur Poirot, you simply must join us for tea," she said, her voice warm but insistent. "You're the famous detective, aren't you? I've read all about your cases." Poirot inclined his head, accepting the compliment with a modest smile. As they settled at a wicker table, Mrs. Allerton leaned closer, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of shared secrets. "That's Lynette Ridgway over there, married just a month ago to that handsome Simon Doyle. Quite a catch, though some say he's more interested in her money than her heart." Poirot raised an eyebrow, encouraging her to continue. "And the young lady with the intense gaze?" he asked, gesturing subtly toward Jacqueline. Mrs. Allerton's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "That's Jacqueline de Belfort, Simon's former fiancée. Oh, it's a scandal." Jacqueline introduced Simon to Lynette, thinking to secure him a position. But Lynette took him for herself. "They say Jacqueline's heartbroken, but I'd wager she's furious. She's been following them, you know, everywhere they go." Poirot nodded, his mind cataloging the details. The triangle of Lynette, Simon, and Jacqueline was a classic tableau of passion and betrayal, the kind that often ended in tragedy. He glanced at the trio again. Lynette radiant but brittle. Simon, attentive yet uneasy. Jacqueline, a shadow cast across their happiness. The Nile flowed on, serene and indifferent, but Poirot's instincts told him that its waters would soon reflect a darker tale as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Painting the sky in hues of amber and rose, Poirot rose from his chair. He adjusted his hat, his movements precise, and murmured to himself, "The heart, it is a complicated thing, and where there is complication, there is danger." With a final glance at the glittering company aboard the SS Karnak, he retired to his cabin, certain that his holiday would be anything but restful. Chapter 2. Shadows of Envy. The dining saloon of the SS Karnak was a study in opulence. Its polished mahogany tables agleam under crystal chandeliers that swayed gently with the steamer's motion. The Nile's dark waters reflected the golden light through wide windows, casting a warm glow over the assembled passengers. Hercule Poirot, seated at a corner table with a view of the entire room, adjusted his tie with meticulous care. His black eyes, sharp as a falcon's, roamed over the company, noting every gesture, every glance, as if the room were a chessboard and he, the Grand Master, anticipating the next move. The air was thick with the clink of cutlery, the murmur of conversation, and the faint scent of roasted lamb and exotic spices, but beneath the civility, Poirot sensed a current of unease. At the center of the saloon, Lynette Ridgway held court, her elegance as commanding as a pharaoh's statue. Her emerald necklace caught the light, each gem a silent testament to her wealth. Her laughter, bright and practiced, rang out as she leaned toward her husband, Simon Doyle, whose broad shoulders seemed to strain against the confines of his dinner jacket. Simon's smile was warm but fleeting, his eyes darting nervously toward the far end of the room. Poirot followed his gaze to Jacqueline de Belfort, who sat alone at a small table, her slender fingers toying with a wine-glass. Her face was a mask of composure, but her eyes burned with an intensity that made Poirot's mustache twitch. Here, he thought, was a woman whose heart was a storm, barely contained. The detective's observations were interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Allerton, who settled into the chair opposite him with a rustle of silk. "Monsieur Poirot, you look positively engrossed," she said, her American accent tinged with mischief. "Are you solving a mystery already, or is this merely the prelude to one of your famous cases?" Poirot smiled, his expression one of practiced humility. "Madame, I am but a humble observer of human nature. The mysteries, they present themselves without my seeking them." Mrs. Allerton chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "Well, you've chosen a fine cast of characters to observe tonight. Have you noticed the tension at the Ridgway Doyle table? Poor Simon looks as if he's sitting on a cactus, and Lynette, well, she's trying too hard to sparkle. Don't you think?" Poirot inclined his head, encouraging her to elaborate. Mrs. Allerton, ever eager to share the gossip she collected like rare coins, leaned closer. "It's no secret that Lynette stole Simon from that de Belfort girl. Jacqueline was his fiancée, you know, until Lynette swept in with her millions. They say Jacqueline was devastated, but I've seen her watching them. There's more than heartbreak in those eyes. I'd wager she's plotting something." Poirot's gaze flicked back to Jacqueline, who had now turned her attention to her plate, though she scarcely touched her food. Her movements were deliberate, almost theatrical, as if she knew she was being watched. "And what, madame, do the other passengers say of this affair?" he asked. Mrs. Allerton's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh, the tongues are wagging. Mrs. Otterbourne, she's the novelist with the garish turban, over their claims. Jacqueline has a vengeful streak. Says she saw her arguing with Simon in Cairo, threatening to ruin them both. And Tim, my son, heard from the steward that Jacqueline's been following the Doyles since their honeymoon began. It's positively gothic, don't you think?" Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the details like entries in a ledger. Mrs. Otterbourne, seated a few tables away, was indeed a striking figure. Her turban adorned with a peacock feather that bobbed as she gesticulated to her daughter, Rosalie. The younger Otterbourne, a pale girl with a sullen air, seemed to shrink from her mother's exuberance. Poirot made a mental note to speak with them later. Mrs. Otterbourne's penchant for drama might yield useful insights, if one could sift through her embellishments. As the meal progressed, Poirot's attention was drawn to other passengers. A young engineer, Jim Fanthorpe, sat quietly, his eyes lingering on Jacqueline with a mixture of concern and admiration. His boyish face and earnest demeanor suggested a man easily swayed by a strong personality. Nearby, Dr. Bessner, an Austrian physician with a booming voice and a penchant for lecturing, was expounding on the virtues of Nile water to a bored-looking Tim Allerton. Colonel Race, a distinguished man with a military bearing, sat alone, his keen eyes scanning the room much like Poirot's. The detective recognized him at once, a friend from past adventures, whose presence on the Karnak suggested more than a mere holiday. The atmosphere shifted as Lynette rose, her emerald gown shimmering. As she crossed the saloon to speak with the steward, Simon followed, his movements stiff, as if he were a marionette jerked by invisible strings. Jacqueline's eyes tracked them, her lips curving into a faint, unreadable smile. Poirot, ever attuned to the nuances of human behavior, felt a prickle of foreboding. The triangle of Lynette, Simon, and Jacqueline was no mere romantic entanglement. It was a powder keg, and the spark was already lit. Dessert was served, a delicate almond pastry dusted with sugar, but Poirot's appetite was for answers, not sweets. He excused himself from Mrs. Allerton's company and strolled to the saloon's edge, where he could observe without being conspicuous. Lynette and Simon had returned to their table, but their conversation was strained, punctuated by silences that spoke louder than words. Simon's hand rested on Lynette's, but his grip seemed more possessive than affectionate. Lynette's smile was fixed, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting an unwelcome guest. Jacqueline, meanwhile, had struck up a conversation with Jim Fanthorpe, who had moved to her table. Her laughter, light and musical, carried across the room, but Poirot noted its calculated edge. She was playing a part, he thought, drawing Fanthorpe into her orbit with the skill of a seasoned actress. The young man blushed, clearly smitten, and Poirot wondered if Jacqueline's charm was a weapon, wielded to some unknown end. As the evening drew to a close, the passengers began to disperse, some to the deck for a moonlit stroll, others to their cabins. Poirot lingered, his mind turning over the fragments of information he had gathered. Mrs. Allerton's gossip, Mrs. Otterbourne's dramatics. Jacqueline's smoldering intensity all pointed to a conflict that simmered beneath the surface of the Carnac's genteel facade. He recalled a phrase from his youth in Belgium: "Oh, il y a de la passion, il y a du danger." Where there is passion, there is danger. And passion, he sensed, was in abundant supply. Stepping onto the deck, Poirot breathed in the cool night air, the Nile's dark expanse stretching before him like a mirror of secrets. The stars above were bright, but their light did little to illuminate the shadows cast by human hearts. He adjusted his hat, his fingers brushing the brim with precision, and murmured to himself, "The game, it has begun." And Hercule Poirot, he will not be a mere spectator. The detective's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement near the railing. Jacqueline de Belfort stood alone, her silhouette stark against the moonlight. She clutched a shawl around her shoulders, her posture rigid with suppressed emotion. Poirot approached silently, his footsteps muffled by the deck's polished wood. "Mademoiselle," he said softly, "the night is beautiful, is it not? Yet it seems to trouble you." Jacqueline started, her eyes flashing with a mix of surprise and wariness. "Monsieur Poirot," she replied, her voice low and controlled, "I didn't see you there. I was just thinking." Poirot tilted his head, his expression one of gentle curiosity. To think alone under the stars is often to wrestle with one's heart. And your heart, mademoiselle, it carries a heavy burden. Nests see paw. Her lips parted, as if to protest, but she caught herself, her gaze hardening. "You're very observant, monsieur. But some burdens are private, even from a detective." Poirot smiled, undeterred. "Privacy, it is a luxury the heart rarely affords. If you ever wish to unburden yourself, Hercule Poirot, he listens." Jacqueline's smile was brittle, her eyes searching his face for an ulterior motive. "Thank you, monsieur, but I manage well enough." She turned away, her shawl slipping slightly, to reveal a silk scarf knotted at her throat. Detail Poirot filed away for later consideration, as she vanished into the shadows. Poirot remained by the railing, his mind a whirl of possibilities. Jacqueline's composure was a facade, he was certain, but what lay beneath it? Revenge, despair, or something more calculated? The Nile flowed on, its surface calm but its depths unknowable, much like the woman he had just encountered. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with activity, piecing together the puzzle that was only beginning to take shape. He returned to the saloon, where a few passengers lingered over coffee and liqueurs. Mrs. Otterbourne, her turban slightly askew, was regaling Colonel Race with tales of her latest novel, her voice carrying across the room. "It's all about passion and betrayal, my dear Colonel. The Nile is the perfect setting for murder, don't you think?" Race's polite smile suggested he was less enthralled than she hoped, but Poirot noted the novelist's words with interest. Her flair for the dramatic might prove useful, if only as a lens through which to view the truth. Tim Allerton, lounging nearby, caught Poirot's eye and raised his glass in a mock toast. "Two mysteries, Monsieur Poirot," he called, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "I wager you'll find one before this cruise is over." Poirot inclined his head, his smile enigmatic. "Monsieur, the mystery, it finds me. And when it does, Hercule Poirot, he is ready." As the night deepened, the Carnac sailed on, its passengers unaware of the storm gathering in their midst. Poirot retired to his cabin, his mind alive with the faces and voices of the evening. Linnet's brittle laughter, Simon's uneasy glances, Jacqueline's burning eyes, all were threads in a tapestry of envy and desire. The detective knew that such threads, when pulled, could unravel lives. He closed his eyes, the gentle rocking of the steamer lulling him into a state of quiet alertness. The shadows of envy had been cast, and Poirot, with his unerring instinct for truth, would follow them to their source. Chapter 3. A moonlit morning, the SS Carnac lay anchored under a velvet sky. The Nile's surface, a mirror of stars, broken only by the occasional ripple of a passing fish. The night was still, save for the distant croak of frogs and the soft creak of the steamer's timbers. Hercule Poirot, unable to sleep, stood on the upper deck, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the desert met the heavens. The air was cool now, a relief from the day's oppressive heat, but Poirot's mind was anything but calm. The tensions he had observed in the dining saloon lingered like a discordant note, and he sensed that the drama aboard the Carnac was approaching its first crescendo. His solitude was broken by the sound of raised voices, sharp and urgent, drifting from the shadows near the stern. Poirot moved silently, his polished shoes making no sound on the polished deck, until he reached a vantage point behind a lifeboat. There, illuminated by the pale glow of a deck lamp, stood Jacqueline de Bellefeuille and Simon Doyle, their figures taut with emotion. Jacqueline's voice, low but laced with venom, cut through the night. "You think you've won, Simon, but I'll never let her keep you. Never." Simon's response was curt, his tone clipped with irritation. "For God's sake, Jackie, stop this. It's over. You need to let go." His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, but his shoulders betrayed a tension that belied his casual words. Poirot, hidden in the darkness, noted the raw edge to their exchange. Jacqueline's hands were clenched, her scarf fluttering in the breeze, and her eyes gleamed with a fire that spoke of more than heartbreak. Simon, meanwhile, seemed less the confident husband of an heiress and more a man caught in a trap of his own making. The detective's mustache twitched as he filed away this encounter, a piece of the puzzle that was beginning to form in his mind. Jacqueline turned abruptly, her footsteps echoing as she retreated toward the cabins. Simon lingered, staring out at the Nile, his face a mask of frustration. Poirot stepped forward, his presence as unobtrusive as a shadow. "Monsieur Doyle," he said softly, "the night, it is full of revelations, is it not?" Simon started, his hand flying to his chest as if caught in some guilty act. "Monsieur Poirot, I didn't see you there. Just getting some air." His smile was forced, his eyes wary. Poirot inclined his head, his expression one of benign curiosity. "The air, it is refreshing, but it does not always clear the mind. You seem troubled, monsieur. Perhaps a burden shared with Hercule Poirot might lighten your heart." Simon laughed, a hollow sound. "No burdens here, monsieur. Just a disagreement with an old friend. Nothing to concern a detective." He nodded brusquely and strode away, his footsteps heavy with unspoken thoughts. Poirot remained by the railing, his mind turning over the scene. Jacqueline's words had carried a threat, veiled but unmistakable, and Simon's dismissal of it seemed less convincing than he intended. The detective's instincts told him that this was no mere lover's quarrel. There was a deeper current at play, one that could lead to dangerous waters. The next morning, the Carnack's passengers gathered for breakfast in the saloon. There, chatter bright but tinged with the lethargy of a night spent in close quarters. Poirot, seated with Colonel Race, noted the absence of Lynette Ridgway and her husband. Jacqueline, however, was present, her demeanor composed but her eyes shadowed, as if sleep had eluded her. She sat with Jim Fanthorpe, the young engineer, who seemed eager to please her. His conversation animated but one-sided. Race, stirring his coffee, leaned toward Poirot. "You've got that look, old friend," he said, his voice low. "The one that says you've sniffed out trouble. Care to share?" Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Mon ami, trouble. It announces itself in whispers before it shouts. I have heard such whispers last night. A conversation between Monsieur Doyle and Mademoiselle de Belfort. It was illuminating." Race's eyes narrowed, his military instincts alert. The jilted fiancé and the new husband. Sounds like a recipe for disaster. Anything I should know? Poirot sipped his tea, considering. For now it is enough to watch. The heart, it betrays itself in small ways, gestures, glances, silences. I suspect Mademoiselle de Belfort is not content to fade into the shadows. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lynette Ridgway, her entrance drawing every eye in the saloon. She wore a pale blue dress that accentuated her golden beauty, but her face was pale, her smile strained. She settled at a table with Simon, who joined her moments later, his expression carefully neutral. Poirot noted the way Lynette's hand trembled as she reached for her coffee, a detail that did not escape her husband's notice. Simon's hand covered hers briefly, a gesture of reassurance or control. After breakfast, Lynette sought out Poirot on the deck, where he stood admiring the Nile's banks, lush with palms and dotted with mud-brick villages. "Monsieur," she said, her voice low and urgent, "may I speak with you, privately?" Poirot bowed, gesturing to a pair of wicker chairs beneath an awning. "But of course, Madame Hercule Poirot, he is always at the service of those in need." Lynette sat, her fingers twisting the hem of her scarf, a silk creation that matched Jacqueline's. Poirot noted with interest. "I don't know where to begin," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm frightened. Someone has been sending me notes, anonymous, hateful notes. They warn me to leave Simon, to give him up, or I'll regret it." Poirot's eyes sharpened, though his tone remained gentle. "These notes, madame, when did they begin?" "Since we arrived in Cairo," she replied, her eyes darting toward the saloon, as if expecting an eavesdropper. "At first I thought it was a cruel prank, but they've grown more threatening. The last one was slipped under our cabin door yesterday. It said, 'The Nile will run red if you don't let him go.'" Poirot leaned forward, his hands folded neatly. "And you suspect, perhaps, Mademoiselle de Belfort?" Lynette hesitated, her lips parting as if to deny it, then nodded. "It must be her. She's followed us everywhere. London, Paris, now here. She's obsessed with Simon. I thought she'd move on, but—" Her voice trailed off, and she shivered despite the morning's warmth. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together the fragments. The notes were a bold move, designed to unsettle, but were they Jacqueline's work, or a distraction crafted by another hand? Madame, he said, have you shown these notes to your husband? Lynette shook her head. Simon's protective, but he'd only make things worse. He feels guilty about Jacqueline, you see. He thinks he's to blame for her state of mind, and is he? Poirot asked, his tone deceptively mild. Lynette's eyes flashed with defiance. Simon loves me. He chose me. Jacqueline can't accept that. She paused, then added softly, but I'm afraid, Monsieur Poirot, afraid of what she might do. Poirot nodded, his expression one of quiet resolve. Fear, madame. It is a signal to be cautious, not to despair. You will show me these notes, s'il vous plaît, and Hercule Poirot. He will ensure your safety. Lynette produced a small envelope from her handbag, its edges crumpled. Inside were 3 notes, written in a precise, angular hand on cheap paper. The messages were, as she described, threatening, but vague, with no explicit signature. Poirot studied them, noting the ink's consistency and the careful lettering. They are not the work of an impulsive mind, he murmured. They are calculated, précis. You will keep them safe, madame, and inform me of any more. Lynette nodded, her relief palpable. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I feel safer knowing you're here. As she left, Poirot's gaze lingered on the notes, his mind turning over their implications. The hand was unfamiliar, but the intent was clear, to sow fear and discord. Whether Jacqueline was the author or a convenient scapegoat, he could not yet say. But the seeds of suspicion had been planted, and Poirot knew that such seeds, in the fertile soil of human passion, could grow into something deadly. The morning passed in a haze of sunlight and activity, the passengers preparing for an excursion to a nearby temple. Poirot, however, remained on deck, his thoughts as relentless as the Nile's current. He was joined by Mrs. Otterbourne, her turban a vivid splash of crimson against the ship's white railings. Monsieur Poirot, she exclaimed, her voice carrying the theatrical flourish of a stage actress. I hear you've been speaking with our tragic heiress. Is it true she's receiving threats? Poirot's smile was polite but guarded. Madame, you are well informed, but such matters, they are delicate, n'est-ce pas? Mrs. Otterbourne waved a hand, her rings glinting. Delicate, yes, but deliciously dramatic. My next novel will feature just such a scenario, a scorned lover, a wealthy bride, a river of secrets. Mark my words, monsieur, this cruise is a powder keg waiting for a match. Poirot inclined his head, amused, despite himself. Your imagination, madame, it is formidable. But tell me, what do you know of Mademoiselle de Belfort? Mrs. Otterbourne's eyes gleamed with relish. Oh, she's a firebrand, that one. I saw her in Cairo, arguing with Simon in a hotel lobby. She was like a fury, all passion and rage. Said she'd make them both pay for betraying her. If you ask me, she's capable of anything. Poirot nodded, storing the information away. Mrs. Otterbourne's flair for exaggeration was evident, but her observations held a kernel of truth. As she prattled on about her novel, Poirot's gaze drifted to Jacqueline, who stood near the gangway, her scarf knotted tightly at her throat. She was speaking with Fanthorpe again, her smile disarming but her posture alert, as if she sensed the eyes upon her. The ship's bell rang, signaling the departure for the excursion. Poirot joined the passengers, his mind a whirl of questions. The moonlit warning he had overheard was but the first note in a symphony of intrigue, and he knew that the melody would grow darker before it resolved. As the Karnak's engines hummed to life, carrying them toward the next chapter of their journey, Poirot's little gray cells were already at work, sifting through the shadows of envy and deceit that clung to the ship like mist on the Nile. Chapter 4. The Temple of Abu Simbel. The SS Karnak lay moored beneath the towering cliffs of Abu Simbel, where the colossal statues of Ramses II gazed impassively across the Nile. The morning sun bathed the ancient stone in gold, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of secrets older than time. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in a cream linen suit, stepped onto the sandy shore with the other passengers, his eyes shielded by a wide-brimmed hat. The air was heavy with heat and the scent of dust, but Poirot's attention was not on the grandeur of the temples. It was on the human drama unfolding among the excursion party. A drama he sensed was nearing a critical turn. The group moved in a loose cluster, their voices echoing off the cliffs as the guide, a wiry Egyptian named Hassan, recited the history of the pharaohs with practiced enthusiasm. Lynette Ridgway walked at the forefront, her white parasol a stark contrast to the desert's ochre hues. Simon Doyle stayed close, his arm linked with hers, though his gaze flickered nervously toward the rear of the group. There, Jacqueline, the Belfort, trailed behind, her dark eyes fixed on the couple with an intensity that made Poirot's mustache quiver. She wore a light cotton dress, her scarf knotted loosely at her throat, and her steps were deliberate, as if she were stalking prey rather than sightseeing. Poirot, walking beside Colonel Race, noted the subtle dynamics of the group. Mrs. Allerton chattered with her son Tim, who seemed more interested in the temple's architecture than his mother's gossip. Mrs. Otterbourne, her turban a garish splash of violet, was lecturing Rosalie on the romantic allure of ancient Egypt, while her daughter's sullen silence spoke of suppressed resentment. Jim Fanthorpe, the young engineer, hovered near Jacqueline. His earnest attempts at conversation met with polite but distracted replies. Dr. Bessner, mopping his brow with a handkerchief, muttered about the heat, while Race's keen eyes scanned the group with a vigilance that matched Poirot's own as they approached the entrance to the great temple. Carved deep into the cliff, Lynette paused to adjust her parasol, her movements betraying a nervous energy. Poirot, ever observant, noted the way her eyes darted toward Jacqueline, who lingered near a column, her posture deceptively casual. Simon's hand tightened on Lynette's arm, a gesture of protection or perhaps possession. The detective's mind churned, recalling Lynette's confession about the threatening notes and Jacqueline's moonlit confrontation with Simon. The pieces were aligning, but the picture remained incomplete. The group entered the temple's cool interior, the air heavy with the scent of stone and time. Hassan's voice droned on, detailing the exploits of Ramses and Nefertari. But Poirot's attention was drawn to a sudden movement above. A low rumble echoed through the chamber, followed by a sharp cry from Lynette. A boulder, dislodged from the cliff above, tumbled down with alarming speed, missing her by mere inches as it crashed to the ground, sending up a cloud of dust. Simon pulled her back, his face pale with shock, while the other passengers froze, their gasps mingling with the settling debris. Hassan rushed forward, his calm demeanor shattered. "Madame, are you hurt?" he asked, his hands fluttering uselessly. Lynette, trembling but unharmed, shook her head, clinging to Simon's arm. The group erupted into a flurry of concern, with Mrs. Allerton exclaiming over the near miss and Mrs. Otterbourne declaring it a scene straight from one of her novels. Poirot, however, remained silent, his eyes scanning the cliff's edge. The boulder's fall had been too precise, too conveniently timed. He approached the spot where it had landed, noting the disturbed earth and the faint scuff marks on the rock above. "Monsieur Hassan," he said, his voice calm but firm, "is it common for such rocks to fall without cause?" The guide shook his head vigorously. "No, monsieur, the cliffs here are stable. We inspect them regularly. This is most unusual." His eyes darted nervously, as if he feared blame for the incident. Poirot's gaze shifted to Jacqueline, who stood apart from the group, her expression unreadable. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a mask of concern. "Poor Lynette," she said softly, her voice carrying just enough sympathy to seem genuine. "What a frightful accident." Simon, still holding Lynette, shot Jacqueline a sharp look. "Accident," he snapped. "That was no accident. Someone pushed that rock." The accusation hung in the air, drawing murmurs from the group. Lynette, regaining her composure, touched Simon's arm. "Darling, don't. It was just a loose stone. Let's not make a scene." Her voice was steady, but Poirot noted the fear in her eyes, a fear that went beyond the near miss. Colonel Race, stepping forward, addressed the group with authority. "Let's all stay calm. Monsieur Poirot and I will look into this. For now, we should return to the ship." His tone brooked no argument, and the passengers began to file back toward the gangway. Their chatter subdued, Poirot lingered, examining the cliff's edge with Hassan's assistance. The guide pointed out a narrow ledge above, accessible by a steep path used by maintenance workers. "No one was up there today," Hassan insisted. "I checked the path myself this morning." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The ledge offered a clear view of the temple entrance, and the boulder's position suggested it had been deliberately dislodged. But by whom? Jacqueline's presence at the rear of the group made her a likely suspect, yet she had been in plain sight when the rock fell. The detective's little gray cells hummed, sifting through possibilities. Was this an attempt on Lynette's life, or a warning meant to terrify? And if Jacqueline was not the culprit, who else stood to gain from such an act? Back on the Karnak, the passengers gathered in the saloon, their mood somber. Lynette, fortified by a glass of brandy, sat with Simon, her hand clasped tightly in his. Poirot approached, his demeanor one of quiet concern. "Madame Doyle," he said, "this incident, it is most distressing. Have you any reason to believe someone wishes you harm?" Lynette hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Jacqueline, who was now seated with Fanthorpe, her expression demure. I don't know," she said at last. "Those notes I showed you, they've made me jumpy. But this could have been an accident, couldn't it?" Poirot's smile was gentle but non-committal. "An accident, madame, is always possible. But Hercule Poirot, he prefers to consider all possibilities." He turned to Simon, whose jaw was set in a hard line. "And you, monsieur, you believe this was no accident?" Simon's eyes flashed with anger. "I'm certain of it. That rock was meant for Lynette. Someone's trying to scare her, or worse. His gaze lingered on Jacqueline, who met it with a cool stare, her lips curving slightly. Poirot noted the exchange, his mind cataloguing the undercurrents of hostility. He excused himself and sought out Colonel Race, who was conferring with the ship's captain near the bridge. "Mon ami Poirot," said, "this incident, it is no mere caprice of nature. The boulder was dislodged with intent, but the hand behind it remains hidden." Race nodded, his expression grim. "I agree. This feels like a prelude to something uglier. Any theories?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with the intensity of a man who thrived on puzzles. "Theories, oui, but they are as yet unformed. Mademoiselle de Belafort, she is the obvious suspect, yet her visibility at the moment of the incident suggests otherwise. We must look beyond the surface, to the motives that lie beneath." Race clapped Poirot on the shoulder. "If anyone can unravel this, it's you. But be careful, Poirot, whoever's behind this isn't playing games." The detective inclined his head, his mustache twitching. "Games, mon ami, are precisely what they play. And Hercule Poirot, he is a master at them." As the Carnac prepared to sail, Poirot stood on the deck, watching the cliffs of Abu Simbel recede into the distance. The passengers had resumed their routines, but the air was thick with unease, as if the ancient gods themselves were watching. Mrs. Otterbourne, passing by, could not resist a dramatic flourish, a near tragedy at the feet of Ramses. She exclaimed, "It's as if the Nile itself is cursed." Poirot smiled politely, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The boulder's fall had been no accident, he was certain, but its purpose remained elusive. Was it meant to kill, to intimidate, or to misdirect? And what role did Jacqueline play, victim, villain, or pawn? The detective's fingers brushed the brim of his hat, a gesture of resolve. The temple of Abu Simbel had borne witness to many secrets, but Poirot vowed that this one would not remain buried in the sands of time. Chapter 5. A shot in the night. The SS Carnac glided through the velvet darkness, its lights casting a soft glow on the Nile's inky surface. The night was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant hum of the engines and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the water. Hercule Poirot, restless despite the late hour, sat in his cabin, a single lamp illuminating the pages of a book he was not reading. His mind was elsewhere, turning over the events at Abu Simbel, the falling boulder, Lynette's fear, Jacqueline's enigmatic smile. The threads of suspicion were weaving together, but the pattern remained elusive, like a hieroglyph yet to be deciphered. A sharp crack shattered the stillness, a sound unmistakable to Poirot's trained ear. A gunshot. It came from the direction of the passenger cabins, followed by a woman's scream and the clamor of footsteps. Poirot sprang to his feet, his movements swift despite his compact frame, and seized his canot for support, but as a precaution. He stepped into the corridor, where passengers were already emerging, their faces pale with alarm. Colonel Race appeared at his side, his military instincts alert. "That was a shot, Poirot," he said, his voice low. "Troubles found us." Together, they hurried toward the source of the sound, a cabin at the end of the corridor. The door stood ajar, revealing a scene of chaos. Lynette Ridgway lay sprawled on her bed, her golden hair fanned across the pillow, a dark stain spreading from a neat bullet hole in her temple. Her emerald eyes, once so vibrant, stared blankly at the ceiling. A pearl-handled pistol lay on the floor beside her, its barrel glinting in the lamplight. On the wall above the bed, scrawled in what appeared to be blood, was a single, jagged letter, J. Simon Doyle stood frozen near the bed, his face ashen, his hands trembling. "Lynette," he cried, his voice breaking. "My God, she's dead." He sank to his knees, his broad shoulders shaking with sobs, the corridor filled with passengers, their voices a cacophony of shock and fear. Mrs. Allerton clutched her shawl, her eyes wide. "Oh, how dreadful!" she gasped. Mrs. Otterbourne, her turban askew, pushed forward, her novelist's instincts overriding decorum. "A murder. Right here on the Karnak. It's like something out of my books." Her daughter Rosalie, pale and silent, hovered behind her, her expression unreadable. Poirot stepped into the cabin, his eyes scanning every detail with surgical precision. The room was tidy, save for the grim tableau of Lynette's body. A glass of water stood on the bedside. Table, untouched. The window was closed, the curtains drawn. The pistol, he noted, bore no obvious fingerprints, its handle polished to a sheen. The J on the wall, however, drew his attention. The bloody assuming it was blood had dripped slightly, suggesting it was fresh when written. Yet something about the scene felt staged, too deliberate. Like a painting composed for effect. Colonel Race took charge, directing the ship's steward to keep the passengers back. "Nobody leaves this corridor," he barked. "Poirot, what do you make of this?" Poirot knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. He examined the wound, noting the absence of powder burns around the entry point. "The shot, it was not fired at close range," he murmured. "And the angle, it is curious, n'est-ce pas? The bullet, it entered from above, as if the shooter stood over her." He glanced at the pistol, its pearl handle gleaming. "This weapon, it is distinctive. We must learn to whom it belongs." Simon, still on his knees, looked up, his eyes wild with grief. "It's Jacqueline's," he said hoarsely. "I recognize it. She showed it to me once, in Cairo. She must have done this. She hated Lynette, hated her for taking me." Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind remained sharp. "Monsieur Doyle, you are certain this pistol is Mademoiselle de Bellefort's?" Simon nodded, his voice choked. "I'd swear to it. She's been following us, threatening those notes, the boulder at Abu Simbel, and now this." He gestured to the J on the wall, his face contorted with rage. "She's left her mark, hasn't she?" Poirot's eyes narrowed as he studied the letter. The J, it is bold, but perhaps too bold. A murderer who signs their work, it is theatrical. He rose, brushing dust from his trousers. "We must speak with Mademoiselle de Belfort at once." Race dispatched a steward to fetch Jacqueline, while Poirot continued his examination. He noted a faint smudge on the bedside table, as if something had been moved, and a single thread of silk caught on the edge of the bedframe blue, like the scarf Lynette had worn the previous day. The detective's mind raced, piecing together the inconsistencies. The absence of powder burns, the angle of the wound, the convenient J, all suggested a crime crafted to mislead. Jacqueline appeared moments later, her face pale but composed, her dark eyes wary. She wore a simple dressing gown, her hair slightly mussed, as if roused from sleep. Monsieur Poirot, Colonel Race, she said, her voice steady. What's happened? The steward said something about Linnet. Race's tone was brisk. Mrs. Doyle is dead, shot in her cabin. Your pistol was found at the scene, and your initial is on the wall. Care to explain? Jacqueline's eyes widened, but she held her ground. My pistol. I haven't seen it. In days, it was stolen from my cabin in Cairo, reported it to the hotel. And as for Linnet, her voice faltered, but only for a moment. I was in the saloon all evening, playing cards with Mr. Fanthorpe. Ask him. I couldn't have done this. Poirot studied her, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes avoided the cabin's interior. Mademoiselle, you were in the saloon at the time of the shot. You are certain? She nodded firmly. Mr. Fanthorpe can confirm. We were there until after midnight. I never left. Poirot turned to the steward, who hovered nervously nearby. Summon Monsieur Fanthorpe, s'il vous plaît. As the steward hurried off, Poirot addressed the gathered passengers. Meet messieurs. This is a grave matter. Until we establish the facts, I ask that you return to your cabins and remain there. The passengers dispersed reluctantly, their whispers trailing like smoke. Mrs. Otterbourne lingered, her eyes gleaming with morbid fascination. A pistol, a letter in blotto. It's too perfect, she exclaimed, before Rosalie tugged her away. Fanthorpe arrived, his boyish face flushed with anxiety. Monsieur Poirot, what's going on? They're saying Linnet's been murdered. Poirot's tone was calm but probing. Monsieur Fanthorpe, Mademoiselle de Belfort, claims she was with you in the saloon at the time of the shot. Can you confirm this? Fanthorpe nodded eagerly. Yes, sir. We were playing cards, gin rummy, to be exact. Miss de Belfort. There from 10 o'clock until well past midnight. We had a couple of drinks, too. The steward can vouch for us. Poirot's mustache twitched. An alibi, so promptly offered, was both a shield and a potential trap. And you heard nothing unusual. No gunshot. Fanthorpe shook his head. Nothing. The saloon's on the other side of the ship, and the music was playing. I suppose it could have muffled the sound. Poirot dismissed him with a nod, then turned to Race. We must secure the scene and await Dr. Besner's examination. The time of death, it will be critical. Dr. Besner, summoned from his cabin, arrived with his medical bag, his gruff demeanor softened by the gravity of the situation. He examined Linnet's body, his fingers deft despite his bulky frame. The shot was fatal, no question, he said, his Austrian accent thick. Death occurred around midnight, give or take an hour. The wound suggests a small caliber bullet, fired from a distance of at least a meter. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing the details. And the blood on the wall, doctor, it is hers. Besner frowned, peering at the J. It appears to be blood, but I'll need to test it. The consistency is unusual. He took a sample, his movements precise, and promised to report his findings. As the doctor worked, Poirot stepped outside, where Simon stood, his face a mask of grief. Monsieur Doyle, Poirot said gently, you were not with your wife when the shot was fired. Simon shook his head, his voice hoarse. I was in the lounge, talking with you and Mr. Allerton. I came to check on Linnet when I heard the scream. I found her, like this. his eyes filled with tears. But Poirot noted a flicker of something else calculation. Perhaps race joined them, his expression grim. The steward confirms Fanthorpe's story. Jacqueline was in the saloon, surrounded by witnesses. If she's telling the truth, she couldn't have fired the shot. Poirot's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. Then, mon ami, we must ask, who did? The pistol, the J, the timing, all are pieces of a puzzle designed to deceive. But Hercule Poirot, he is not so easily misled. As the passengers returned to their cabins, the Carnac seemed to hold its breath, the weight of death pressing against its polished decks. Poirot stood alone in the corridor, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. The shot in the night had been no random act. It was a move in a deadly game, and the players were still in shadow. With a final glance at Linnet's cabin, he murmured, "The truth? It hides, but not for long. Hercule Poirot, he will find it." Chapter 6. The web of alibis. The SS Carnac lay still under a dawn sky streaked with rose and amber, the Nile's surface reflecting the tentative light as if reluctant to reveal its secrets. Hercule Poirot stood on the deck, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on the water's gentle ripples. The events of the night, Linnet Ridgway's murder, the pearl-handled pistol, the blood-scrawled J, had set the ship abuzz with fear and suspicion. Yet Poirot's mind was a calm vortex, sifting through the chaos to find the thread of truth. The alibis, he knew, were the key, but like a spider's web, they were delicate, intricate, and possibly deceptive. In the dining saloon, the passengers gathered for a subdued breakfast, their usual chatter replaced by hushed whispers and wary glances. The absence of Linnet's radiant presence left a void, and Simon Doyle's empty chair underscored the tragedy. Poirot, seated with Colonel Race, observed the group with the precision of a watchmaker examining gears. Jacqueline de Belfort sat alone, her composure a stark contrast to the previous night's accusations. Jim Fanthorpe, hovering nearby, seemed anxious to speak with her, but hesitated. His boyish face clouded with doubt. Mrs. Allerton, usually effervescent, stirred her tea absently, while her son Tim watched the room with a detached curiosity that intrigued Poirot. Mrs. Otterbourne, undeterred by the somber mood, was already spinning theories, her voice carrying across the saloon. Race leaned closer, his voice low. "We've got a mess on our hands, Poirot. Jacqueline's alibi seems watertight, but that J on the wall screams her name. And Simon's insistence on her guilt, well, it's a bit too convenient, don't you think?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. Convenience, mon ami, is the hallmark of a crafted narrative. The J, it is too bold, too obvious. A true murderer does not sign their work unless they wish to mislead. We must test these alibis, untangle the web. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Bestner, who approached with a grave expression, his medical bag clutched in one hand. "Monsieur Poirot, Colonel Race," he said, his Austrian accent thick with urgency. "I have results from the blood sample. The mark on the wallet is not blood. It is nail polish, red, applied with a brush. A crude imitation." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "Nail polish, c'est intéressant. This changes the tableau, does it not? The J, it was meant to point to Mademoiselle de Belfort, but it is a clumsy ruse. We must speak with her again, and with the others who claim to know where they Where Race nodded, his jaw set. I'll organize interviews in the lounge. The captain's given us free rein to investigate, but the passengers are jittery. We need answers fast. The lounge, with its plush armchairs and wide windows overlooking the Nile, became Poirot's temporary headquarters. He began with Jacqueline, who entered with a defiant tilt of her chin, her dark eyes meeting his without flinching. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, settling into a chair. "I told you last night Ty was in the saloon with Mr. Fanthorpe. I didn't kill Linnet, and I didn't write that, Jay. My pistol was stolen, as I said." Poirot leaned forward, his hands folded neatly. "Mademoiselle, your alibi, it is strong, but alibis, they are like glass, beautiful, but easily shattered. Tell me, what was your state of mind last night?" "You were seen watching Madame Doyle." "With intensity." Jacqueline's lips curved into a wry smile. "You're observant, monsieur." "Yes, I watched her. I loved Simon once, and seeing him with her hurt. But I'm not a fool. Killing her would gain me nothing. I was angry, yes, but I stayed in the saloon, drowning my sorrows in gin and cards." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And Monsieur Fanthorpe, he was with you the entire time, from 10 until after midnight," she said firmly. "We played cards, talked, had drinks. The steward served us." "Ask him." Poirot dismissed her with a polite nod, then summoned Fanthorpe. The young engineer entered nervously, his hands fidgeting with his tie. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice earnest, "I swear Miss de Belfort never left the saloon. We were together the whole evening. I'd have noticed if she slipped away." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are very certain, monsieur? And what was the nature of your conversation? You seemed captivated by Mademoiselle de Belfort." Fanthorpe blushed, his boyish features betraying his discomfort. "She's compelling, sir. We talked about the Nile, her travels, my work. Nothing unusual. The steward brought us drinks around 11, and we were still playing cards when I heard the scream." Poirot made a mental note of Fanthorpe's devotion, which could cloud his judgment, or make him a willing accomplice. "And the pistol, monsieur? You have seen it before?" Fanthorpe shook his head. "Never. Miss de Belfort mentioned it was stolen, but I never saw it myself." Next, Poirot interviewed Mrs. Allerton, who entered with a nervous smile. Her usual vivacity dimmed. "Monsieur Poirot, this is simply awful," she said, clutching her handbag. "Poor Linnet, shot like that. I was in my cabin, reading, when I heard the scream. I didn't hear the shot. My cabin's on the other side of the ship." Poirot tilted his head, his tone gentle. "And your son, Monsieur Tim? He was with you?" Mrs. Allerton hesitated, her fingers tightening on her bag. "Tim was out, I think. He likes to wander the deck at night. But he's a good boy, monsieur. He'd never be involved in anything like this." Poirot's smile was reassuring, but his mind noted the hesitation. Tim Allerton, with his sharp eyes and flippant demeanor, warranted closer scrutiny. Of course, Madame Mignot saw nothing unusual before retiring. She shook her head. "Nothing. I saw Linnet and Simon at dinner, looking strained. And Jacqueline, of course, watching them like a hawk. But that's all." Poirot thanked her, and moved on to Tim Allerton, who sauntered in with a casual air that belied the gravity of the situation. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, dropping into a chair. This is quite the drama, isn't it? Poor Lynette. Any leads? Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement at Tim's nonchalance. Leads, monsieur. They emerge from the truth. Where were you when the shot was fired? Tim shrugged, his smile easy. Strolling the deck, smoking a cigarette. I heard the scream and came running like everyone else. Didn't hear the shot though. Too far away, I suppose. Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but probing. And you saw no one near Madame Doyle's cabin? No one acting strangely? Tim's eyes flickered, but his tone remained light. Not a soul. The deck was quiet. Everyone was either in the saloon or their cabins. Sorry, I can't be more help. Poirot dismissed him, his mind alert to Tim's evasive charm. The young man's alibi was vague, his manner too polished. Next, he called Mrs. Otterbourne, who swept in with theatrical flair, her turban adorned with a glittering brooch. Monsieur Poirot, she exclaimed, this is a tragedy of epic proportions. A scorned lover, a fatal shot. My readers will devour it. Poirot's smile was patient. Madame, your imagination, it is vivid. But tell me, where were you last night? Mrs. Otterbourne waved a hand. In my cabin, plotting my next novel. Rosalie was with me until about 11. Then she went for a walk. I heard the scream and rushed out, but I saw nothing until I reached Lynette's cabin. It's Jacqueline's doing, mark my words. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You are certain, madame? You have evidence? She faltered, her bravado waning. Well, no evidence, but it's obvious. She's been stalking them, consumed by jealousy. It's the perfect motive. Poirot thanked her and called Rosalie Otterbourne. The young woman entered reluctantly, her face pale and her eyes shadowed. Monsieur Poirot, she said quietly, I don't know anything about this. I was on the deck after leaving mother, then went to bed. I heard the scream and came running. Poirot studied her, noting her guarded demeanor. And you saw no one near Madame Doyle's cabin? No one acting suspiciously? Rosalie shook her head, her lips tight. No one. It was quiet until the scream. As she left, Poirot turned to Race, who had been listening silently. The alibis, they are consistent, yet they feel orchestrated. Jacqueline's is the strongest, yet the pistol and the J point to her. It is a paradox, n'est-ce pas? Race nodded, his expression grim. Too neat, if you ask me. And there's another wrinkle. Lynette's pearls are missing. The steward checked her cabin. That necklace she wore at dinner, worth a fortune, is gone. Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden intensity. The pearls, they add a new dimension. Theft, it is a motive as old as time, but it complicates the picture. Was the murder for love, for money, or both? Race rubbed his chin. Simon inherits Lynette's fortune, doesn't he? That's a motive right there. But he was with you in the lounge, wasn't he? Poirot nodded slowly. Oui, but only moments after the scream. The timing, it is tight, but not impossible. We must reconstruct the night, minute by minute. As they prepared to continue their inquiries, Poirot's mind raced. The alibis formed a web, each strand supporting the others, yet the center, the truth remained hidden. The missing pearls, the nail-polished J, the stolen pistol were clues in a game of misdirection. He recalled a phrase from his days in Belgium, La vérité, elle est comme l'eau, du Nile coule, mais elle est profonde. The truth, like the Nile's waters, flowed deep. With a resolute twirl of his mustache, Poirot vowed to dive into its depths. Chapter 7. The Missing Pearls. The SS Karnak steamed steadily along the Nile, its engines a low hum beneath the morning's golden light. The air was thick with the scent of river water and the distant temps of desert dust, but aboard the ship, an oppressive silence hung over the passengers. Lynette Ridgway's murder had cast a pall, transforming the luxury cruiser into a floating stage for suspicion and dread. Hercule Poirot, standing at the rail of the upper deck, gazed at the passing palms, his mind as sharp as the sunlight glinting off the water. The missing pearls, revealed by Colonel Race, had added a new layer to the mystery, a motive of greed that intertwined with the threads of passion and vengeance already in play. Poirot's thoughts were interrupted by the approach of Mrs. Allerton, her usual cheer subdued by the weight of the tragedy. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low, "this is all so ghastly. First Lynette, and now I hear her pearls are gone. It's like a nightmare." Poirot inclined his head, his eyes gentle but probing. "Indeed, madame, the loss of such jewels, it is significant. Tell me, did you notice Madame Doyle wearing her pearls last night at dinner?" Mrs. Allerton nodded, her fingers twisting a lace handkerchief. "Oh yes, they were stunning, an emerald and pearl choker, impossible to miss. She wore them like a queen, though I thought she seemed nervous. Poor dear." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his mind at work. "Nervous, you say? And did you see anyone near her cabin later that evening? Perhaps someone who might have taken an interest in those pearls?" She shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, I was in my cabin by 10, reading. But Tim was out, he often takes a late walk. You don't think surely he wouldn't?" Her voice trailed off, a mother's fear surfacing. Poirot's smile was reassuring. "Monsieur Tim, he is a young man of spirit. But I seek only the truth, madame. If he saw anything, it may help us." As Mrs. Allerton retreated, Poirot made his way to the lounge, where Colonel Race was organizing a search for the missing pearls. The captain had ordered the crew to check every public area, but the passengers' cabins remained off-limits without evidence. Race, his face etched with determination, greeted Poirot with a nod. "No sign of the pearls yet," he said. "The steward swears they were in Lynette's cabin yesterday afternoon, locked in her jewelry case. Someone got to them, after the murder or during it." Poirot's eyes gleamed with interest. "The timing, it is crucial. If the pearls were taken after the shot, it suggests an opportunist. If during, it points to a motive beyond passion. We must question those who were near the cabin." Their first stop was Rosalie Otterbourne, who had been seen lingering near Lynette's cabin the previous evening. Poirot found her on the lower deck, leaning against the rail, her face pale and her eyes shadowed by more than lack of sleep. She wore a simple grey dress, her usual sullenness deepened by the morning's events. "Mademoiselle Otterbourne," Poirot began, his tone gentle but firm, "you were observed near Madame Doyle's cabin last night. May I ask why?" Rosalie's eyes flicked up, guarded but not hostile. "I was just walking, Monsieur Poirot. I couldn't sleep, and the deck was quiet. I didn't go into her cabin, if that's what you're implying." Poirot tilted his head, studying her. "And you saw nothing unusual? No one entering or leaving her cabin, perhaps carrying something valuable?" Rosalie's lips tightened. her fingers clutching the rail. No one. I passed by around 11, maybe a bit later. The corridor was empty. I went back to my cabin soon after. Her voice was steady, but Poirot noted a slight tremor in her hands, a sign of unease. He pressed gently. And the pearls, mademoiselle. You saw Madame Doyle wearing them at dinner. They are now missing. Have you any thoughts on where they might be? Rosalie's eyes narrowed, a spark of defiance breaking through her reserve. I don't know anything about her pearls. I'm not a thief, Monsieur Poirot, and I'm not a murderer. I just wanted some air. Poirot nodded, dismissing her with a polite smile, but his mind filed away her evasiveness. Rosalie's proximity to the crime scene was a thread worth tugging, though her motive remained unclear. Was she hiding something, or merely caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? Next, Poirot and Race sought out Tim Allerton, who was lounging in the saloon, a cigarette dangling from his fingers. His casual demeanor contrasted sharply with the ship's tense atmosphere, and Poirot noted the sharpness in his eyes, a mind always calculating beneath the flippant exterior. Monsieur Allerton, Poirot said, settling across from him, you were on the deck last night, n'est-ce pas? Perhaps you saw something that could shed light on the tragedy or the missing pearls. Tim exhaled a plume of smoke, his smile wry. You're a bloodhound, aren't you, Monsieur Poirot? I was wondering, yes, but I didn't see anything worth reporting. No shadowy figures clutching pearls, if that's what you're after. I heard the scream and joined the crowd at Linnet's cabin, same as everyone else. Poirot's gaze was unwavering, and before the scream, you were near the cabins, perhaps. The pearls, they are a great temptation, Nan. Tim's smile faltered, but only for a moment. Tempting, sure, but I'm not in the habit of stealing. I was on the upper deck, smoking, until the commotion started. Ask the night steward, he saw me there around 11:30. Poirot made a mental note to verify the alibi, sensing that Tim's nonchalance was a carefully crafted shield. You are most cooperative, monsieur. If you recall anything, even a trifle, you will inform Hercule Poirot. Tim nodded, his eyes glinting with amusement. Of course, monsieur. I'm all for catching the culprit makes for a better story. As Tim sauntered off, Race muttered, that one's too smooth for my liking. He's hiding something, even if it's just mischief. Poirot's mustache twitched. Perhaps mon ami, but mischief does not always mean murder. We must look deeper. Their next interview was with Simon Doyle, who had retreated to his cabin, his grief tempered by a restless energy. Poirot found him pacing, his handsome face haggard, his hands clenched into fists. Monsieur Doyle, Poirot said, his voice soft but probing, the loss of your wife. It is a tragedy. But the pearls, they are also gone. Can you tell us when you last saw them? Simon stopped pacing, his eyes meeting Poirot's with a mix of anguish and suspicion. The pearls, I saw them at dinner, she was wearing them. She locked them in her jewelry case afterward, like always. I didn't check again. Why does it matter? Lynette's dead, and you're worried about her jewels. Poirot's expression was one of gentle reproof. Everything matters, monsieur. The pearls, they suggest a motive, greed perhaps, or a desire to confuse. You are certain they were in the case after dinner? Simon nodded, his jaw tight. I watched her put them away. The case was locked. and she kept the key in her handbag. Whoever took them must have broken in after. His voice broke, and he turned away, his shoulders shaking. Poirot exchanged a glance with Race, who raised an eyebrow. Simon's grief seemed genuine, but his quickness to point to Jacqueline earlier suggested a narrative he was eager to promote. Poirot made a mental note to inspect the jewelry case himself. As they left Simon's cabin, Poirot paused in the corridor, his eyes falling on a small object glinting in the corner, a scrap of blue silk, caught on a nail protruding from the wall. He bent to retrieve it, holding it up to the light. It matched the scarf Lynette had worn at dinner, and perhaps the one Jacqueline favored. "C'est curieux," he murmured. "This silk, it is a clue, but to what?" Race frowned. Could be Lynette's, torn in a struggle, or someone planted it to point to Jacqueline. Poirot nodded, slipping the scrap into his pocket. "We must examine the jewelry case and the cabin again. The pearls, they are the key to unlocking this mystery." Back in Lynette's cabin, now guarded by a steward, Poirot inspected the jewelry case, a lacquered box with a sturdy lock, undisturbed on the dressing table. The key, found in Lynette's handbag, opened it easily, revealing an empty velvet lining where the pearls should have been. Poirot's fingers traced the lock, noting no signs of tampering. "The thief, they had access to the key," he said, "or they were skilled enough to pick the lock without a trace." Race's eyes narrowed. "That narrows it down. Simon had access, and maybe the steward. But a skilled thief could be anyone. Tim Allerton, for instance, strikes me as clever enough." Poirot's mind churned, the missing pearls adding a new dimension to the web of alibis. Jacqueline's alibi held, but the silk scrap and the stolen pistol kept her in the frame. Simon's grief seemed real, yet his inheritance made him a suspect. Rosalie and Tim, with their vague alibis and proximity to the crime, could not be dismissed, and the nail-polished J, a deliberate misdirection, but by whom? As the Carnac sailed on, Poirot stood alone in the cabin, his little grey cells working furiously. The pearls were more than a prize. They were a message, a piece of the puzzle that would reveal the murderer's hand. He murmured to himself, "The Nile, it hides its treasures, but Hercule Poirot, he will uncover them." With a resolute nod, he left the cabin, determined to follow the trail of the missing pearls to the heart of the crime. Chapter 8. Poirot's little grey cells. The SS Carnac pressed onward through the Nile's shimmering waters, the midday sun casting a relentless glare over the deck. The passengers, subdued by the weight of Lynette Ridgway's murder and the theft of her pearls, kept to their cabins or huddled in small groups, their whispers tinged with unease. Hercule Poirot, however, sought solitude in his own cabin, a compact sanctuary of order where he could unleash the full power of his little grey cells. Seated at a small desk, his hands folded neatly before him, he closed his eyes, letting the fragments of the case swirl in his mind like leaves on the river's surface. The gunshot, the nail-polished J, the missing pearls, the web of alibis, each was a piece of a mosaic, and Poirot was determined to assemble it. He began with the timeline, reconstructing the fatal night with meticulous precision. Lynette had been seen alive at dinner, her emerald and pearl choker a beacon of wealth. She retired to her cabin around 10, locking the pearls in her jewelry case, as Simon had confirmed. The shot, muffled but unmistakable, had rung out near midnight, according to Dr. Bessner's estimate. Simon claimed to have been in the lounge with Poirot and Tim Allerton, joining the crowd only after the scream Rosalie Otterbourne's, as it turned out, who had been passing by the cabin. Jacqueline de Bellefort, the obvious suspect, had an ironclad alibi. She was in the saloon, playing cards with Jim Fanthorpe, witnessed by the steward until well past midnight. Yet her pistol, allegedly stolen, lay beside Lynette's body, and the J scrawled in nail polish pointed directly to her. Poirot's mustache twitched as he considered the J. It was too blatant, a theatrical flourish meant to incriminate Jacqueline. A true murderer, he reasoned, would not be so careless unless they intended to mislead. The nail polish, not blood, suggested premeditation, not passion. Someone had planned this crime, down to the smallest detail, and the pearls' disappearance added a layer of complexity. Were they stolen to fund a getaway, to frame another, or simply to confuse? He turned his thoughts to the bolder incident at Abu Simbel. The falling rock, narrowly missing Lynette, had been no accident. Hassan's insistence on the cliff's stability confirmed that. Jacqueline had been nearby, her fleeting smirk noted by Poirot, yet she was in plain sight when the boulder fell. Could she have orchestrated it, perhaps with an accomplice? Or was it another misdirection, designed to paint her as a threat while shielding the true culprit? The alibis troubled him. Jacqueline's was airtight, supported by Fanthorpe, and the steward Fanthorpe's devotion to her was evident, but was he a dupe or a conspirator? Tim Allerton's vague account of wandering the deck was less convincing, his charm a potential mask for calculation. Rosalie Otterbourne, seen near Lynette's cabin, claimed to have been walking, but her evasiveness suggested more. Simon, grieving, yet quick to accuse Jacqueline, had been with Poirot after the scream, but the timing allowed a narrow window for action. Could he have slipped away earlier, unnoticed? Poirot opened his eyes, his gaze falling on the scrap of blue silk he had found near Lynette's cabin, now resting on his desk. It matched the scarves worn by both Lynette and Jacqueline, a detail that could implicate either or neither, if planted. He considered the pearls, locked away yet vanished without a trace of forced entry. The key, found in Lynette's handbag, suggested someone with access. Simon, perhaps, or a skilled thief among the passengers. Tim Allerton, with his sharp mind, was a candidate, as was Rosalie, whose sullen demeanor might hide a desperate motive. The detective rose, pacing the small cabin, his steps measured, but purposeful. He recalled his conversation with Lynette about the threatening notes, vague, ominous, written in a precise hand. Were they Jacqueline's work, or a prelude to frame her? The notes, the boulder, the pistol, the J, all pointed to her. Yet her alibi stood firm. Poirot paused, his fingers brushing his mustache. "C'est un paradoxe," he murmured. "The evidence accuses, but the truth, it whispers otherwise." A knock at the door interrupted his reverie. Colonel Race entered, his face etched with concern. "Poirot, we've hit a snag," he said, closing the door behind him. The stewards searched every public area, no sign of the pearls, and Simon's pushing hard for us to arrest Jacqueline. Says he's certain she's behind it all. Poirot's eyes gleamed with sudden intensity. "Monsieur Doyle, he is most insistent. But why? To protect himself, perhaps. His inheritance, it is substantial, n'est-ce pas?" Race nodded, settling into a chair. "Lynette's fortune goes to him, No question. Millions, by all accounts. That's motive enough for murder. But he was with you in the lounge, wasn't he? Oui, Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. But only after the scream. The shot, it was earlier. Perhaps 10 minutes. Perhaps less. A man could move quickly, act, and return. And the pearls, were they taken to obscure the true motive? Race. Rubbed his chin. You're thinking Simon's involved. He's playing the grieving husband well, but I've seen men fake tears before. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. The heart, it is a stage, and some play their roles with skill. But there is another possibility, a partnership. Jacqueline and Simon, their conflict, it is public, dramatic. What if it is a performance, designed to conceal their collaboration? Race's eyes widened. You think they're in it together? But her alibi is perfect, Poirot finished. Too perfect, perhaps. A true alibi leaves room for error. But hers is a clockwork machine. We must test it, and we must find those pearls. Race leaned forward. There's more. Mrs. Otterbourne's been talking. She claims she overheard something last night, before the murder. Won't say what until she speaks with you directly. She's in the saloon now, waiting. Poirot's mustache twitched with anticipation. Madame Otterbourne, she loves the dramatic. Let us see what she has to offer. They found Mrs. Otterbourne in the saloon, her turban a vivid splash of orange, her hands gesticulating as she spoke to a weary Rosalie. Monsieur Poirot, she exclaimed, spotting him. I have information, vital information. Last night, I was on the deck, plotting my novel, when I heard voices near the cabins. I couldn't help but listen. It's my writer's instinct. You understand? Poirot's tone was patient. And what did you hear, madame? She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a stage whisper. It was Simon Doyle, speaking with someone, a woman, I think, he said. It's all going according to plan. And she replied, just make sure it's clean. I couldn't see who it was, the shadows were too deep, but it sounded conspiratorial. Poirot's eyes narrowed. You are certain of these words, madame, and the time? Around 10:30, she said, her eyes gleaming. I didn't think much of it then, but now, with Lynette dead, it's chilling, isn't it? Poirot thanked her, his mind racing. Simon, plotting with an unknown woman, Jacqueline, or someone else. Rosalie, perhaps, or even Mrs. Allerton. The conversation, if true, was a crack in the facade, a glimpse of the truth beneath the alibis. As Mrs. Otterbourne swept away, Rosalie lingered, her expression troubled. Monsieur Poirot, she said quietly, my mother exaggerates, but she's not lying. She did hear something last night. I was with her until 11, and she was restless, pacing the deck. Poirot studied her, noting the tension in her posture. And you, mademoiselle, you heard nothing yourself? Rosalie shook her head, her eyes averted. Nothing. I was distracted. But I don't trust Simon. He's too quick to blame Jacqueline, and it feels wrong. Poirot nodded, dismissing her gently. Her reluctance to speak freely was another thread to unravel. He turned to Race, his voice low. We must verify Madame Otterbourne's story, and we must watch Monsieur Doyle. His grief, it may be genuine, but his actions, they suggest more. Race agreed. I'll have the steward keep an eye on him. And we need to search the cabins discreetly. Those pearls didn't vanish into thin air. Poirot's mind returned to his little gray cells, now humming with purpose. The pearls, the J, the overheard conversation all pointed to a crime of calculation, not impulse. Simon's inheritance was a powerful motive, but Jacqueline's role remained ambiguous. Was she the mastermind, the scapegoat, or both? And who was the woman in the shadows, plotting with Simon? The detective closed his eyes, letting the pieces shift and settle. The truth, he murmured, it is like the Nile's current, hidden, but relentless. Hercule Poirot, he will follow it to its source. Chapter 9. The second victim, the SS Karnak, steamed through the Nile's shimmering waters, the morning sun casting long shadows across the deck. The air was thick with the scent of river reeds and the faint hum of the engines, but aboard the ship, a fresh wave of dread had replaced the initial shock of Lynette Ridgway's murder. Hercule Poirot stood in the lounge, his hands clasped behind his back, his sharp eyes scanning the passengers as they gathered for a somber breakfast. The missing pearls, the nail-polished J, and Mrs. Otterbourne's overheard conversation had deepened the mystery, and Poirot's little grey cells were alight with the challenge of untangling the web of deceit. The fragile calm shattered with a piercing scream from the lower deck, followed by the clatter of footsteps and a cry of alarm. Poirot, moving with surprising agility for his compact frame, hurried toward the sound, Colonel Race at his side. They found a cluster of passengers outside Mrs. Otterbourne's cabin, their faces pale with shock. Rosalie Otterbourne stood in the doorway, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. "Mother," she gasped, her voice breaking, "she's bled." Poirot pushed through the crowd, his expression grave but composed. Inside the cabin, Mrs. Otterbourne lay slumped in an armchair, her garish turban askew, a thin trickle of blood seeping from a wound in her chest. A surgical knife, its blade stained crimson, lay on the floor beside her, glinting in the morning light. The air was heavy with the metallic temps of blood and the faint scent of Mrs. Otterbourne's lavender perfume. Poirot knelt beside the body, his fingers deft as he examined the scene without disturbing it. The knife had pierced her heart, and her lifeless eyes stared at the ceiling, frozen in a moment of surprise. Race, his military bearing taut with urgency, addressed the passengers. Everyone stepped back. This is a crime scene. Stay in the lounge until we call you. His voice carried authority, and the group dispersed reluctantly, their whispers a low hum of fear. Poirot's eyes scanned the cabin, noting its disarray of overturned glass, a scattered pile of papers, a silk shawl draped haphazardly over a chair. This was no random act, he murmured. Madame Otterbourne, she knew something, and it cost her life. Race nodded, his jaw tight. She claimed she overheard Simon with a woman last night, plotting something. If that's true, she was a threat to the killer. Poirot's mustache twitched as he examined the knife. This blade, it is surgical. Nest CEPA. Dr. Bessner, he will know its origin. He rose, his gaze lingering on the paper's pages. From Mrs. Otterbourne's latest manuscript, filled with melodramatic prose about love and betrayal. One sheet, crumpled near her hand, bore a hastily scrawled note. Simon Dangertel Poirot. Poirot handed the note to Race, his eyes gleaming with intensity. She tried to warn us, but too late. We must speak with Dr. Bessner at once. They found the Austrian physician in the saloon, his face flushed with agitation as he sipped a coffee. Monsieur Poirot, Colonel Race, he said, rising clumsily. Another murder. This is madness. Who would do such a thing? Poirot held up the knife, wrapped in a handkerchief. This blade, doctor, it is from your medical kit. Besner's eyes widened, his hands trembling. Yeah, it looks like mine. But it was in my bag, locked in my cabin. I checked it yesterday afternoon, everything was there. Poirot's tone was calm but probing. And last night, doctor, your cabin, it was secure. Besner nodded vigorously. Locked tight? I was in the saloon until 11, then went to bed. I heard nothing until the scream this morning. Poirot exchanged a glance with Race, who made a note to check the cabin's lock. We will need to examine your bag, Dr. Poirot said. And tell me, did Madame Otterbourne speak to you about any suspicions? She claimed to have overheard something significant. Besner shook his head, his brow furrowed. She said nothing to me, but she was always talking. That woman. Always stories, always drama. I paid her no mind. Poirot dismissed him, his mind racing. The surgical knife suggested access to Besner's kit, but the doctor's alibi was as solid as Jacqueline's. The killer, it seemed, was adept at exploiting opportunities, slipping through the ship's routines unnoticed. Next, Poirot sought out Rosalie Otterbourne, who sat in the lounge, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her eyes, red-rimmed from tears, met Poirot's with a mixture of grief and defiance. Mademoiselle, he began gently, your mother's death, it is a tragedy. She left a note, suggesting she knew something about Monsieur Doyle. Can you tell us what she meant? Rosalie's lips trembled, but her voice was steady. She was going to tell you something this morning. Last night, after dinner, she said she'd heard Simon talking to a woman about a plan. She thought it was connected to Lynette's death. I told her to stay out of it, but she wouldn't listen. She said it was her duty to help. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And this woman, mademoiselle, did your mother say who it was? Rosalie shook her head, her fingers twisting a handkerchief. She didn't know, it was dark, and she only heard voices. But she was sure it was Simon, and she thought it might be Jacqueline. Poirot's mustache twitched. Jacqueline, again. Yet her alibi for Lynette's murder is unbreakable. Tell me, mademoiselle, where were you when your mother was attacked? Rosalie's eyes flashed with sudden anger. I was in my cabin, asleep. I woke to the scream. It was one of the maids, I think. I ran to mother's cabin and found her, like that. Her voice broke, and she looked away, her shoulders trembling. Poirot's tones softened. You have my condolences, mademoiselle. If you recall anything more, you will tell Hercule Poirot. She nodded, her face a mask of grief, and Poirot dismissed her, his mind cataloguing her words. Rosalie's story aligned with her mother's, but her reticence suggested she knew more than she admitted. Was she protecting someone, or simply overwhelmed by loss? Race, standing nearby, spoke in a low voice. 2 murders now, and the pearls still missing. This is getting uglier by the hour. Mrs. Otterbourne's death feels like a silencing someone didn't want her talking. Poirot nodded, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. Precisement, she was a witness, however unwitting. The killer, they are bold, but they fear exposure. We must question Simon Doyle again, and we must find that woman he spoke They found Simon in the saloon, his face haggard, his eyes bloodshot from sleeplessness. He stood as they approached, his hands clenched into fists. "Monsieur Poirot, Colonel Race, what's this about another murder? Mrs. Otterbourne dead? What the devil is happening on this ship?" Poirot's voice was calm but incisive. "Monsieur Doyle, Madame Otterbourne claimed to have overheard you last night speaking with a woman about a plan. She believed it was connected to your wife's death. Can you explain?" Simon's face flushed, his jaw tightening. "That's nonsense. I was in the lounge after dinner, with you and Tim Allerton. I didn't speak to any woman about a plan. She must have misheard, or she's making it up to stir trouble." Poirot's eyes narrowed, studying Simon's agitation. "And yet, Madame Otterbourne is dead, stabbed with a knife from Dr. Best's kit. You were near the cabins last night, n'est-ce pas? Perhaps you saw something, or someone." Simon shook his head, his voice rising. "I told you, I was with you until the scream. After that, I went to Lynette's cabin and found her dead. I didn't see anyone, and I didn't talk to any woman about a plan." "You're barking up the wrong tree, Poirot." Race stepped forward, his tone firm. "Calm down, Doyle. We're trying to get to the bottom of this. If you're innocent, you've nothing to fear." Simon sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping. "I just want this nightmare to end. First Lynette, now this. Find the killer, please." Poirot dismissed him, his mind churning. Simon's denial was vehement, but his quickness to deflect suspicion onto Jacqueline, coupled with Mrs. Otterbourne's note, suggested a deeper involvement. The surgical knife, like the nail-polished J, was another calculated touch, pointing to a killer who planned meticulously yet struck with desperation. As the day wore on, Poirot and Race coordinated with the captain to search the passengers' cabins discreetly, focusing on those with weak alibis or proximity to the crimes. Tim Allerton's cabin yielded nothing but books and cigarettes, while Rosalie's contained only her mother's manuscripts and a few personal items. Jacqueline's cabin, however, held a surprise. A bottle of red nail polish, half empty, tucked in her vanity case. Poirot held it up, his eyes gleaming, the same shade as the J, Piter. But her alibi, so there what? To picky this Race frowned. If she's involved, someone else pulled the trigger. Fanthorpe's too smitten to lie for her, but he could be mistaken about the timing. Poirot nodded, slipping the bottle into his pocket. "We must test every strand of this web." The second victim, she confirms the killer's fear of discovery. But Hercule Poirot, he will not be deterred. As the Carnac sailed toward its next stop, the passengers remained on edge, their trust in one another eroded by fear. Poirot stood alone on the deck, the Nile's current a mirror to his thoughts, deep, relentless, and hiding truths yet to be revealed. The second murder had tightened the noose, but it had also exposed the killer's desperation. With a resolute twirl of his mustache, Poirot vowed to follow the trail to its end, no matter how dark the path. Chapter 10. The trap is set. The SS Carnac glided through the Nile's tranquil waters. The afternoon sun, casting a golden haze over the river's banks, where date palms swayed against a backdrop of distant cliffs. Aboard the ship, however, the atmosphere was taut with suspicion. The double murders of Lynette Ridgway and Mrs. Otterbourne, weaving a net of fear around the passengers. Hercule Poirot stood in the lounge, his compact figure a beacon of calm amid the storm. His little gray cells, honed by years of unraveling human deceits, had pieced together a delicate structure of logic that he now prepared to test. The time had come to set a trap, to coax the killer from the shadows into the light of truth. Poirot had requested the passengers' presence in the saloon, and they gathered reluctantly, their faces a gallery of unease. Simon Doyle sat near the front, his handsome features drawn with grief, though his eyes flickered with a wariness that did not escape Poirot's notice. Jacqueline de Belfort, composed but pale, occupied a corner, her dark eyes meeting no one's gaze. Jim Fanthorpe hovered nearby, his boyish devotion to Jacqueline evident in his protective glances. Rosalie Otterbourne, still shaken by her mother's death, sat with her hands clasped tightly, her sullen demeanor softened by grief. Tim Allerton lounged with his usual nonchalance, a cigarette dangling from his fingers, while Mrs. Allerton twisted her handkerchief, her usual cheer replaced by anxiety. Dr. Bessner, mopping his brow, muttered about the heat, and Colonel Race stood at Poirot's side, his military bearing a silent assurance of order. Poirot stepped forward, his voice clear and commanding, cutting through the murmur of the crowd. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his mustache twitching with purpose. "We are gathered to confront a grave matter: 2 murders committed aboard this ship, and a theft that weaves them together. Madame Ridgway, shot in her cabin, and Madame Otterbourne, stabbed with a surgical knife, were victims of a mind both cunning and desperate. But Hercule Poirot, he does not rest until the truth is revealed." The passengers shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between Poirot and one another. Simon's jaw tightened, and Jacqueline's fingers tightened around her shawl. A blue silk scarf that matched the scrap found near Lynette's cabin. Poirot continued, his tone measured but relentless. "Let us begin with the first crime. Madame Ridgway was shot near midnight, a pearl-handled pistol at her side, a J scrawled in nail polish, not blood on the wall. This J, it points to Mademoiselle de Belfort, whose pistol was used. Yet Mademoiselle, she has an alibi, confirmed by Monsieur Fanthorpe and the steward. She was in the saloon, playing cards, until after the shot was fired. C'est impossible, you say, for her to have committed the crime." Jacqueline's eyes flashed, but she remained silent, her composure a shield. Fanthorpe nodded vigorously, his voice earnest. "She was with me the whole time, Monsieur Poirot. I swear it." Poirot raised a hand, his gaze piercing. "Oui, monsieur. Fanthorpe, your loyalty, it is admirable. But loyalty, it can blind. Let us consider the second crime. Madame Otterbourne, she claimed to have overheard a conversation plan involving Monsieur Doyle and a woman. She was silenced before she could reveal more, stabbed with a knife from Dr. Besner's kit. This suggests a killer who fears exposure. A killer who moves among us." Simon stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You're saying I'm involved? I loved Lynette, never harm her. Jacqueline's the one with the motive. She hated Lynette for taking me." Poirot's eyes gleamed, undeterred. "Monsieur Doyle, your passion, it is noted, but let us examine the facts. The boulder at Abu Simbel, it nearly killed your wife. The notes, they threatened her. The pistol, it was Mademoiselle de Belfort's, yet stolen. The pearls, they are gone, and you, monsieur, inherit a fortune. These are threads, and they lead to a pattern. The saloon was silent, the passengers hanging on Poirot's words. He turned to Jacqueline, his voice softening. Mademoiselle, your alibi, it is perfect. Too perfect, perhaps. A shot was heard in the saloon, was it not? A blank, fired to establish your presence while another acted. The nail-polished J, it was a clumsy attempt to frame your two. Make us believe you were framed. Jacqueline's composure cracked, her eyes widening. You're wrong, Monsieur Poirot. I didn't fire any shot, blank or otherwise. I was in the saloon, as Jim said. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. And yet, mademoiselle, a bottle of red nail polish was found in your cabin. The same shade as the J. A coincidence, Pater, or a clue to a deeper game? He turned to the group, his voice rising with authority. Let us reconstruct the night. Madame Ridgway retires to her cabin, locking her pearls away. A shot is fired, not the one that kills her, but a blank, in the saloon, to secure Mademoiselle de Bellefort's alibi. The true shot, it comes later, fired with a silenced pistol, leaving no powder burns. Monsieur Doyle, you were in the lounge. With me, but only after the scream. A clever man could slip away, act, and return in moments. Simon's face reddened, his fists clenching. This is absurd. I was with you, Poirot. I didn't leave until the scream. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his tone relentless. And the pearls, monsieur, taken from a locked case, with a key only you and Madame Ridgway had access to. The silk scrap, blue, like Mademoiselle de Bellefort's, scarf for your wife's, the surgical knife, taken from Dr. Besner's kit, used to silence Madame Otterborn, who heard your plan. A plan, monsieur, that you shared with a partner. The saloon erupted in gasps, and Jacqueline stood, her voice sharp. Enough. You're accusing us of working together. That's insane. I hated what Lynette did, but I didn't kill her. Gaze was unwavering. Mademoiselle, your hatred, it was a performance. N'est-ce pas? You and Monsieur Doyle, you staged a feud to divert suspicion. The boulder, the notes, the pistol, all part of a masquerade. You fired the blank in the saloon, while Monsieur Doyle slipped away, used a silenced pistol to kill his wife, and planted the J to frame you. Madame Otterborn, she overheard your plan, and so she too was silenced. Simon's face drained of color, his voice a hoarse whisper. You can't prove any of this, Poirot. It's all conjecture. Poirot's smile was cold. Conjecture, monsieur. The nail polish, it matches Mademoiselle de Bellefort's. The silk scrap, it links to your wife's scarf, found near her cabin, and Madame Otterborn's note, Simon Danger. It confirms her suspicions. You planned to inherit Lynade's fortune, and Mademoiselle de Bellefort, she was your accomplice, bound by love or greed. Jacqueline's composure shattered, her eyes blazing. She took a step toward the door, but Race was faster, blocking her path. Not so fast, Miss de Bellefort, he said, his voice firm. You're not going anywhere until we sort this out. The passengers watched in stunned silence, their eyes darting between Simon, Jacqueline, and Poirot. Rosalie Otterborn's hands trembled, and Tim Allerton's cigarette hung forgotten. Ash falling to the floor. Mrs. Allerton clutched her son's arm, her face pale. Poirot raised a hand, his voice commanding. The trap, it is set, and the truth, it emerges. Monsieur Doyle, Mademoiselle de Belfort, your alibis, they are clever, but they crumble under scrutiny. The pearls, they are hidden, but they will be found. Confess now, and spare yourselves further shame." Jacqueline's eyes met Simon's, a silent communication passing between them. For a moment, it seemed she might speak, but she turned away, her lips tight. Simon, however, slumped in his chair, his defiance fading. "You've got it wrong, Poirot," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Poirot's gaze softened, but his resolve was iron. "The truth, it is like the Nile, it flows, and it cannot be stopped." Hercule Poirot, he sees through the shadows. Race signaled the steward to guard the saloon's exits, ensuring no one could leave. "We'll search their cabins again," he said to Poirot. "If the pearls are here, we'll find them, and if they're guilty, they'll slip up." As the passengers were dismissed to their cabins under supervision, Poirot remained in the saloon, his mind a whirlwind of certainty. The trap had been set, and the killers had been cornered. The pearls, he suspected, were still aboard, hidden by a hand that thought itself clever. With a resolute nod, he murmured, "The game, it nears its end, and Hercule Poirot, he will checkmate." Chapter 11. The Confession. The saloon of the SS Carnac was a crucible of tension. Its plush furnishings and wide windows overlooking the Nile, at odds with the grim drama unfolding within. The passengers confined to their cabins under the watchful eye of the ship's crew left an eerie silence in their wake, broken only by the soft creak of the steamer's timbers. Hercule Poirot stood at the center of the room, his compact figure radiating authority, his mustache perfectly waxed despite the chaos of the past days. Colonel Race stood beside him, his military precision a steady counterpoint to Poirot's theatrical flair. The trap had been set, and now, with Simon Doyle and Jacqueline de Belfort summoned once more, Poirot prepared to draw the truth from the shadows. Simon entered first, his broad shoulders slumped, his handsome face etched with exhaustion and defiance. Jacqueline followed, her dark eyes blazing with a mix of fear and resolve, her silk scarf knotted tightly at her throat. The air between them crackled with unspoken words, a bond that Poirot had long suspected was more than it seemed. The steward closed the door behind them, and Race positioned himself near the exit, his hand resting lightly on his pocket, where a revolver lay ready. Poirot's voice was calm but unrelenting, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "Monsieur Doyle, Mademoiselle de Belfort," he began, his eyes moving between them, "the time for games, it is over. 2 women are dead, Madame Ridgway, shot in her cabin, and Madame Otterbourne stabbed to silence her knowledge. The pearls are missing, the pistol is yours, Mademoiselle, and the J scrawled in nail polish points to you. Yet your alibi, it is perfect. Too perfect. Hercule Poirot, he sees the truth, and it is time for you to confess." Simon's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. "You're mad, Poirot," he said, his voice hoarse. "I loved Lynette. I'd never hurt her. And Jacqueline, she was in the saloon. You said so yourself. You've got no proof, just wild theories." Jacqueline's lips parted, as if to speak, but she caught herself, her gaze flicking to Simon. Poirot noted the exchange, a silent signal that confirmed his suspicions. "Monsieur Doyle," he said, stepping closer, "your grief, it is convincing, but it is a performance, n'est-ce pas? Let us unravel this crime, step by step, and see where the truth lies. He paced the saloon, his movements deliberate, his voice weaving a narrative as intricate as the Nile's currents. Madame Ridgway, she was shot with a silenced pistol. Not the pearl-handled one found at the scene. The J, written in nail polish from Mademoiselle de Bellefort's cabin, was meant to implicate her, yet her alibi confirmed by Monsieur Fanthorpe, and the steward places her in the saloon at the time of the shot. This is a paradox, unless we consider a conspiracy. Simon's face paled, but he held Poirot's gaze. Conspiracy? You're saying we worked together? That's absurd. Poirot's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. Absurd. Nan, monsieur, it is brilliant. Let us reconstruct the night. A blank shot is fired in the saloon, a distraction, orchestrated by Mademoiselle de Belfort to establish her alibi. You, Monsieur Doyle, slip away from the lounge, where you were seen earlier with me and Monsieur Allerton. You enter your wife's cabin, using her key, and shoot her with a silenced pistol, leaving no powder burns. You place Mademoiselle de Bellefort's stolen pistol beside her, write the J with nail polish, and take the pearls to suggest theft as a motive. You return to the lounge, and moments later, the scream Rosalie Otterbourne's draws the crowd. Composure cracked, her voice sharp. This is nonsense, Monsieur Poirot. I fired no blank shot. I was playing cards with Jim Fanthorpe. Ask him. Poirot's smile was cold. Monsieur Fanthorpe, he is devoted to you, mademoiselle. His testimony, it is sincere, but it is flawed. The blank shot, it was loud enough to be heard, yet timed to coincide with your presence in the saloon. A clever touch, but not clever enough. Race stepped forward, his voice firm, and Mrs. Otter. She overheard you, Doyle, plotting with a woman. She was going to tell Poirot, so she was stabbed with Bessner's knife. Convenient, isn't it, that it was accessible to anyone on the ship? Simon's eyes darted to Jacqueline, a flicker of panic breaking through his facade. I didn't talk to anyone about a plan. Otterbourne was a meddling busybody, she made it up. Poirot's voice softened, but his gaze was relentless. Madame Otterbourne, she wrote a note. Simon danger to Poirot. She heard you, monsieur, with a woman, planning cleanly. That woman, I believe, was Mademoiselle de Bel. Your feud, it was a masquerade, a public display to divert suspicion. You planned Lynette's death for her fortune, and Mademoiselle de Belfort, bound by love or ambition, was your partner. Jacqueline's face drained of color, her hands trembling. You're wrong, Poirot, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. She took a step toward the door, but Race blocked her path, his expression stern. Poirot continued, his tone inexorable. The boulder at Abu Simbel, it was a rehearsal, meant to establish Mademoiselle as a threat. The notes, they were your work, Mademoiselle, to frighten Lynette and lay the groundwork for her murder. The pearls, they were taken to muddy the waters. But they are still aboard, hidden in a place only you to know. Simon's defiance crumbled, his shoulders sagging. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. You don't understand, he muttered. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. Poirot's eyes softened, but his resolve was iron. Monsieur, the truth, it cannot be hidden. Confess, and let the burden lift. Simon looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of despair and resignation. All right, Poirot, he said, his voice breaking. You're right, it was Uzeki and me. We planned it. Linnet's money. It was the only way we could be together. Free. I never loved her, not really. It was always Jackie. Jacqueline's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. I loved him, Monsieur Poirot. When Linnet took him, I thought I'd lost everything. But Simon came to me, said we could have it all, her money, our future. We staged the feud, the notes, the boulder. I fired the blank in the saloon, and Simon, her voice faltered, he did the rest. Poirot nodded, his expression one of quiet sorrow. And Madame Otterbourne. She overheard your plan, and so she died. Simon's voice was barely a whisper. She was going to ruin everything. I took the knife from Bessner's kit, waited until she was alone. It was quick. She didn't suffer. Race's face hardened, his hand tightening on his revolver. You'll answer for this, both of you. Where are the pearls? Jacqueline's lips curved into a bitter smile. Hidden in Simon's cabin, behind the mirror. We thought we'd get away with it. Poirot's gaze was steady. His voice soft, but firm. The heart, it betrays, and the truth, it emerges. You played a dangerous game, and it has ended. Race signaled the steward to retrieve the pearls and summoned the captain to take Simon and Jacqueline into custody. As they were led away, Jacqueline's defiance returned, her eyes blazing. We loved each other, Poirot. That's something you'll never understand. Poirot watched them go, his heart heavy with the tragedy of their choices. The saloon, now empty, seemed to echo with the weight of their confession. Race clapped a hand on his shoulder. Well done, old friend. You saw through their charade. Poirot's smile was tinged with sadness. Oui, mon ami, but it is no triumph. Love and greed, they twist the soul, and leave only ruin. As the Carnac sailed on, the Nile's waters reflected the fading light, a silent witness to the unraveling of a deadly plot. Poirot turned away, his mind already seeking the calm of order, though he knew the echoes of this case would linger long after the ship reached shore. Chapter 12. The Nile runs still. The SS Carnac approached its final destination, the bustling port of Cairo, where the Nile's waters merged with the clamor of the city. The late afternoon sun painted the river in hues of amber and rose, its serene surface belying the turmoil that had unfolded aboard the steamer. Hercule Poirot stood alone on the upper deck, his hands clasped behind his back, his impeccable suit a stark contrast to the disarray of human passions he had just unraveled. The confessions of Simon Doyle and Jacqueline de Belfort had lifted the veil on a meticulously planned crime, yet the weight of their betrayal lingered, a shadow that even the Nile's timeless flow could not wash away. Below deck, the passengers were preparing to disembark, their voices subdued, their faces marked by the strain of the past days. The murders of Linnet Ridgway and Mrs. Otterbourne, coupled with the revelation of Simon and Jacqueline's conspiracy, had shattered the illusion of a carefree holiday. Poirot's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the minarets of Cairo pierced the sky, a reminder of a world beyond the ship's confines. Yet his mind remained fixed on the case, replaying the threads he had woven into a tapestry of truth. Colonel Race joined him, his military bearing softened by a rare wariness. It's over, Poirot, he said, leaning against the rail. The pearls were found exactly where Jacqueline said, behind the mirror in Doyle's cabin. The police are waiting at the dock to take them into custody. You've done it again, old friend. Poirot's mustache twitched, but his smile was tinged with melancholy. Oui, mon ami, the case it is solved, but the victory it is hollow. 2 lives lost, 2 others ruined by their own desires. The heart, it is a treacherous thing, n'est-ce pas? Race nodded, his eyes scanning the river. Love and greed, deadly combination. Simon and Jacqueline thought they could outsmart everyone, but they couldn't outsmart you. Poirot inclined his head, accepting the compliment with his usual modesty. The little gray cells, they see what others overlook. The blank shot, the nail-polished J, the staged feudite was a performance, brilliant but flawed. They underestimated the power of order, of method. As the Carnac neared the dock, the passengers gathered their belongings, their movements heavy with the weight of the ordeal. Mrs. Allerton, her usual vivacity dimmed, approached Poirot, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, clutching her handbag, "I don't know how you did it, but thank you. This nightmare, it's over because of you." Poirot bowed slightly, his expression gentle. "Madame, it is my duty to restore order where chaos reigns, but I regret the cost." Tim Allerton, lingering nearby, offered a wry smile. "You're a marvel, Poirot. I half expected you to pin it on me, the way I was skulking about the deck." Poirot's eyes twinkled with amusement. "Monsieur Tim, your charm, it is a distraction, but not a deception. You are innocent, though perhaps not of mischief." Tim laughed, a rare moment of levity, and escorted his mother to the gangway. Rosalie Otterbourne, her face pale but composed, passed by without a word, her grief for her mother a silent burden. Poirot watched her go, his heart heavy with sympathy. She had lost much, yet her silence during the investigation had protected no one but herself. Dr. Bessner, mopping his brow, stopped to shake Poirot's hand. "Herr Poirot, your mind, it is a wonder. My knife used for such a crime, I am horrified, but you have brought justice." Poirot nodded, his voice soft. "Justice, doctor, it is a necessity, but it does not heal the wounds." As the passengers disembarked, Poirot and Race oversaw the transfer of Simon and Jacqueline to the Egyptian authorities. Simon, his defiance gone, walked with a defeated slump, his hands cuffed. Jacqueline, her head held high, cast a final glance at Poirot, her eyes a mix of defiance and despair. "You were right, monsieur," she said, her voice low. "We played a dangerous game, and we lost." Poirot met her gaze, his expression one of quiet sorrow. "Mademoiselle, the game of love and greed, it has no winners, only victims." As they were led away, Race turned to Poirot, his voice low. "What will happen to them, do you think?" Poirot's eyes followed the pair until they vanished into the crowd. "The law, it will decide their fate. But their punishment, it began the moment they chose betrayal." The Carnack's decks emptied, the passengers dispersing into the chaos of Cairo, their holiday forever marked by tragedy. Poirot remained on the deck, the Nile's waters lapping gently against the hull. He thought of Lynette, her beauty extinguished by greed, of Mrs. Otterbourne, silenced for her unwitting knowledge, of Simon and Jacqueline, bound by a love that had twisted into destruction. The river flowed on, indifferent to human folly, its secrets buried in its depths. Poirot adjusted his hat, his fingers brushing the brim with precision. "The Nile, it runs still," he murmured, but the heart, it never rests. With a final twirl of his mustache, he turned toward the gangway, ready to step back into a world where order and justice were his constant companions. The case was closed, but another, he knew, would soon call for Hercule Poirot's little gray cells.